This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com in review. What I'm looking at today is 1992's Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth, directed by Anthony Hitchcock. And this is an interesting movie. It's not that great, actually. It's probably, of the three movies produced at the time, it's probably the weakest of the three. But it's also interesting in its own way. If you've heard of the British science fiction series Space 1999, you probably noticed that its first season was remarkably different from its second, which is to say, it was more emotional, it was more explodey, which is to say things blew up a lot more often than they did in the first season. And there was a reason for that. The second season of Space 1999 was catering to an American audience, so it underwent certain changes. Some, I think, for the better, others not so much. And Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth, seems to be in a similar sort of situation, which is to say it's catering to a more mainstream American audience. And you have Anthony Hitchcock, who directs it, who's British, by the way, though his approach feels very American to me, which is to say you have lots of explosions. The movie has a brighter, more varied color palette. The cinematographer or director of photography for Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth, was Jerry Lively. I was about to say George. Jerry Lively. And he brings more color to it, which is to say it's a brighter movie, visually speaking. Lots of reds, lots of colors that pop. And that's actually welcome, because I thought the first two movies were somewhat drab and somber. But at the same time, there's also this weird haze over the film as well, as if there's always smoke present. It's really odd, and it actually distracts from me enjoying this movie just a little bit. I wish with that increased brightness of the color palette that the sharpness of the movie increased as well, but that's not the case. It's pretty much more colorful than the prior two entries in terms of the color palette, but it's also somewhat murky, which is again odd, but there you go. It's, as I said, seemingly geared towards an American audience, which is to say things blow up a lot. And as an American, I don't mind explosions. In fact, I find them interesting. I don't necessarily think they belong in this movie, but I don't mind that. And it's worth mentioning, I actually enjoyed the second season of Space 1999 over the first. Though exploding spaceships is an entirely different thing than exploding hubcaps and exploding cars, which Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth, has plenty of. The story revolves around mainly different characters, but continues after Hellbound, Hellraiser 2, which is to say you have a reporter played by Terry Farrell, who played Dax in Deep Space Nine. And she's a reporter, and she happens to be at the hospital when someone who's been attacked by Pinhead is rolled in, which is to say chains are hanging, this type of thing. And at some point this person is ripped apart. Well, I should say their head explodes somehow by these chains. And speaking of heads exploding, Bob Keenan comes back for special effects. He did the special effects for Hellraiser, but he was only a consultant for Hellraiser 2 Hellbound. And the special effects aren't that great, at least compared to the first two movies. And part of the problem is that Anthony Hitchcock has a certain style when he shoots. He oftentimes relies on close-ups, and the makeups, particularly some instances of Pinhead, don't hold up very well under that kind of scrutiny. And in fact, in Hellraiser and Hellbound, Hellraiser 2, none of those type of tight shots exist. And I think there's a reason for that. Namely, as I said, the makeup wouldn't have stood up to it. In any case, Terry Farrell's reporter sees this person torn apart, and there was a girl accompanying the person to the hospital. And before she left, she mentioned something about a club called the Boiler Room. And this is one of the problems with Hellraiser 3. The aesthetic, the visual presentation is like a music video. And there are parts of the movie that take place in the Boiler Room, which is a club. And you have people on stage singing and performing. It feels like a music video. And this does not benefit the movie because I wouldn't say necessarily feels cheap, because I get the feeling more money was spent on Hellraiser 3 than maybe even the first two movies combined. But it kind of makes it seem somewhat disposable. It's not terribly grounded in the way it approaches its visuals. It feels almost as if it lacks the gravitas of the first two movies, which it does, by the way. One criticism of Hellraiser 3 was that Pinhead created these really dopey Cenobites. Now, I wouldn't go as far as that, though they are kind of silly, but that's actually a strength, as far as I'm concerned, as opposed to a criticism. Because, think about it for a moment. Hellraiser is not Leviathan, who is the Lord of the Labyrinth, who we were introduced to in Hellbound Hellraiser 2. So, the fact that Pinhead cannot create Cenobites of the caliber that Leviathan did, for me makes sense. And in fact, I like that aspect of it. I like the idea that these Cenobites were somehow less interesting, and they were, let's be honest, than the Cenobites created by Leviathan. It makes perfect sense to me. I like that. I like it a lot. And in fact, the silliness of those Cenobites that Pinhead created makes it work even better. It was a great touch. I assume it was an accident, but it works really well by my reckoning. And this movie has a great ending. It implies lots of things if you really think about it, though it's something that's not explored at all in the third movie, though I wish it were. I read depictions of Pinhead in Hellraiser 3 being compared to characters like Freddy, particularly in the jokey aspect of the character. And I'd have to disagree with that as well. In fact, I, for the most part, like the depiction of Pinhead in Hellraiser 3. He is powerful, and he's not afraid to show it. Though he doesn't particularly crack wise. He can be very sarcastic, but he's not doing Freddy Krueger imitations by any stretch of imagination. On the whole, the depiction of Pinhead works. I actually like it a lot, which is part of the conundrum with this movie. There's quite a bit to like about it. As I said, it's not a great movie, but there are parts of it that work really well. And I think in the hands of a more talented director, because let's be honest, I don't think Anthony Hitchcock is a great director. I think it would have worked even better. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com in review. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow. Peace.